Greetings, friends, and welcome to our 16th installment of a Bible Refresher in 5. What's in it for you? Reed Bear, pastor and teacher at West Parish of Barnstable United Church of Christ on Old Cape Cod here with our Holy Week edition. Well, yesterday was Palm Sunday, a day we remember Jesus' entry into Jerusalem, the first day of a week which will go very badly for him. That week, often referred to as Holy Week, contains such iconic events as the entry into Jerusalem, the driving out of the money changers in the temple, confrontations with the religious authorities, the Last Supper, Jesus' betrayal by Judas and abandonment by his disciples, Jesus' arrest, his trial, and crucifixion. The events of this week are recounted in all 4 of the Gospels. They account for a full 1/2 of Mark's Gospel. Mark's concern clearly is an interpretation of Jesus that stresses his suffering and death rather than his exalted identity and his marvelous powers. And so he constructs his Gospel to give so much emphasis on that one last week. Now, for Paul the Apostle, the author of those many letters in the Bible, including his letter to the Romans, the 2 letters to the Corinthians, and so on, the importance of Christ was his death and resurrection, not his life, his ministries, and his teachings. Paul repeatedly proclaims that he preaches Christ crucified. For Paul, the death and resurrection of Christ is the event through which we are freed from the powers of sin and death and made right with God. But now a word of caution when it comes to reading the biblical accounts of that fateful last week, particularly with regard to John's Gospel, a misreading of which for centuries has contributed to the persecution of Jews. In all of the Gospels, John presents by far the most hostile picture of relations between Jesus and the Jews. Throughout John's Gospel, Jesus rebukes the Jews for their failure to recognize or understand him. The Jews try to stone Jesus. People who confess Jesus as Messiah are put out of the synagogue. John tells us that Pilate wanted to release Jesus, but the Jews demanded that he be crucified. None of this makes sense, of course. Jesus was a Jew. His followers were Jews. So what's really going on here, the scholars tells us, reflects a state of hostility between a Christian group for whom John is writing some decades after the death of Jesus, and the Jewish society to which its members had belonged. So when John writes of the Jews, he is not referring to the Jewish people as a whole, but to the religious leaders of the day. In short, Jews did not kill Jesus, the Romans did, although the Jewish leaders of the day, collaborators with the imperial occupiers, seem to have been on board with removing this troublesome agitator from Galilee from the chessboard. Bottom line, I will not read in public worship John's Gospel using his words, the Jews. Instead, I substitute the Jewish leaders, and yet still worry that listeners will equate those few leaders at one specific place and time with the Jewish people. And so I am always looking to remind them of this error. And while I would encourage you to read the biblical accounts of Jesus' last week, I recommend that you start with Mark, Matthew, and Luke. Finally, I share with you the reaction of one of my church school students to my reading in class of the events surrounding Jesus' arrest and crucifixion. Wow, that's dark. She was right. It is dark, dark as a stone-cold tomb. And yet, if you brave that darkness, how much readier will you be for the light which is to come on Easter Sunday? What's in the Bible for you? Nothing less than new and abundant life. See you next time, and God bless you all, everyone.